I'm joined now from Tel Aviv by the Israeli Prime Minister's spokesman, Mark Regev. Mr. Regev, I hope you heard Mr. Al-Hassan there from Gaza. You shell, you kill civilians,
I heard every word.
But there is no peace process. You won't lift the siege. This will never end.
That's a bit ludicrous from a Hamas spokespeople, because from the very beginning they've said they oppose any peace process with Israel. They believe my country should be obliterated. You just have to read the Hamas charter. They say only violent jihad is the solution to what they call the question of Palestine. They say every Jew is a legitimate target for terrorist attack, men, women, and of course, as we saw 2 weeks ago, children. It's a violent extreme organization that opposes peace. In fact, I think it's fair to say that Hamas is the antithesis of peace.
We've heard from Hamas. We have spoken to Hamas. You are the representative of the Israeli government. You talk about men, women and children dying.
Correct.
It is your shells which have killed more than 1,000 Palestinians. Hamas, yes, have to take responsibility for the rockets they fire, but you have to take responsibility for the fact that you fire shells which have killed more than 1,000 civilians, estimated a fifth of them children.
We don't want to see a single Palestinian civilian casualty, and we do our best. We try to be as precise as we can not to hit civilians. Unfortunately, sometimes civilians are caught up in the crossfire. And our problem is, despite the denials of the Hamas official before me, is that Hamas does adopt a deliberate strategy of using civilians as human shields. Not that Mark Regev says so. I'll give two examples. One, the UN. The United Nations put out a report showing that there were 2 documented cases where Hamas stored its rockets in UN schools.
Well, that's a very...
And just now, your reporter interviewed a senior Hamas official. Where was the senior Hamas official you're interested? He's in a hospital. Why is he, the Hamas leadership, hanging around in a hospital?
Excuse me, that's a very interesting point you raised, that the UN have pointed to a couple of occasions where Hamas have used schools. Look at Beit Hanoun the other day, a UN school. You knew there were children there. You asked them to evacuate. You knew you were going to carry out a strike. You did carry out a strike, and people died. Children died.
That's not clear. Our report of that incident, and it's still going on, shows that it appears that the casualties were not from Israeli fire. And we know, as the UN itself reported, Hamas rockets were falling in the vicinity of Beit Hanoun that same day. Now, we're checking it out. But for you to say unequivocally that they died as a result of his erasure, even the UN doesn't say that.
But the point
so I think you should be more careful with what you're saying.
But the point is, you point to the UN saying that Hamas used schools and hospitals. You shelled the Shifa hospital.
They do.
Beit Hanoun, if I can just make the point, you told them to evacuate from there, and then a few hours later, there was shelling at that hospital, at that school. It is a fair assumption that
but once again,
Israelis
the UN
did
does
carry
not
that
say
out.
that the UN does not say that the people died because of an Israeli shell. They don't know that for a fact. We don't know it for a fact. It could have been other ordnance, as they themselves reported. There could have been a Hamas rocket. But let's be clear here. This whole issue of human shields is not open for debate. I'd ask you once again, your Channel 4 reporter is interviewing a Hamas leader in a hospital. Why is that interview happening in a hospital? Because the Hamas leadership is in the basement of the Shifa hospital, using all the doctors, nurses and patients there as human shields.
The point is that it's the only place at the moment we can broadcast from. But just on a wider issue, there is a question, isn't there? At what point...
That's not true. Journalists are broadcasting from all over Gaza.
At what point do you decide that 1,000 Palestinians have lost their life, more than 40 Israelis? At what point do you decide this has to end? We have to try something different.
Well, the truth is we didn't want this conflict in the first place. And we wish we wouldn't be in this conflict. We accepted a week ago an Egyptian ceasefire proposal supported by the Arab League that would have ended the conflict. And of course, as you've reported here, Hamas said no. And our problem is, the fundamental challenge we face is you're dealing with a very ruthless, extreme Islamist organization, not that dissimilar to ISIS in Iraq or Hezbollah in Lebanon or even Boko Haram in Nigeria. This group isn't really interested in peace. That's the bottom line.
Mark Regev, thank you very much for joining us from Tel Aviv this evening. Thank you. And you can get more from Paul Mason in Gaza, as well as all our Middle East coverage, by going to our website, channel4.com/news.